Trump's strongman persona inevitably results in lies and war. By Professor Diesen. Trump's claim that Prime Minister Modi had promised to end the purchase of Russian oil was obviously false. In fact, there was apparently no phone call between the two leaders at all. Such fabrications, portraying world leaders as deferential to him and as praising his greatness, constitute a recurring pattern, one that parallels his militaristic approach to peace. As the president of a declining hegemon, Trump is convinced that the weakness of his predecessors was the source of decline. Trump has therefore concluded that projecting strength can reverse the erosion of American power. In constructing himself as the ultimate strongman, allegedly respected by all, he positions himself as the sole savior of the US. The image of a powerful, decisive and respected leader capable of restoring US dominance also functions domestically to consolidate political support and project stability during the country's uneasy transition from a unipolar to a multipolar international order. The American public is seemingly prepared to look the other way or justify the dishonesty and moral digressions as the price worth paying for a return to greatness. The central problem with the strongman image is that it sustains unrealistic expectations of reviving US primacy rather than adapting to the realities of a multipolar world. The outcome is a pattern of deception and conflict that ultimately undermines rather than strengthens the United States. When the strongman cannot coerce his counterparts into subservience, the only recourse is retreat into fantasy. In this imagined world, other leaders allegedly regret their decisions of not falling into line. They tremble as Trump wags his finger, shower him with compliments, offer tribute to the United States, and in Trump's own words, line up to kiss my ass. Within the Trumpian bubble of superpower cosplay, these scenes of deference are celebrated as signs of a return to greatness. Yet in the real world, American credibility declines and decadence deepens. As the gap between fantasy and reality widens, Trump becomes increasingly reckless. Case in point, the threats against India to sever ties with Russia and India backfired spectacularly, as Prime Minister Modi instead went to China to cement India's relations with Russia, China, and the SCO. Great powers and independent states cannot simply fall into line, for doing so would predictably lead to their destruction or subjugation. The ultimate aim of an aspiring hegemon is not to reconcile differences in pursuit of peaceful coexistence, but to defeat rival powers and capture independent states. The objective of the economic confrontation with China is not to renegotiate trade agreements, but to undermine China's technological capacity and contain it militarily to restore US primacy. The purpose of the proxy war against Russia is not peace in terms of finding a new peaceful status quo, rather it is to use Ukrainians and increasingly Europeans to bleed and weaken Russia until it can no longer sustain great power status. Similarly, the goal of the confrontation with Iran is not to reach a new nuclear accord. Tehran has already accepted such terms in the past, but to achieve Iran's capitulation and disarmament by linking the nuclear issue to restrictions on missiles and regional alliances. Any power that concedes even marginally to US pressure ultimately finds itself in a weaker and more vulnerable position, one that the aspiring hegemon will inevitably exploit. India presents an intriguing case, as it is not an adversarial power. Its commitment to non-alignment makes strong relations with the United States desirable, yet the very same non-alignment necessitates strategic diversification to reduce excessive reliance on Washington. Should India be persuaded to sever ties with other major powers, such as Russia and China, it risks becoming too dependent on the United States and absorbed into a bloc-based geopolitical system. Subordination to a declining empire would be perilous, as the United States would predictably use India as a front line against China and simultaneously demand economic tribute and cannibalize Indian industries in pursuit of renewed dominance. In essence, India must avoid becoming another Europe. The Strongman Act is most effective with weaker independent states, such as those in Europe, that are willing to subordinate themselves entirely in order to preserve American commitment to the continent. European states lack the economic capacity, security, autonomy, and political imagination to envisage a multipolar world in which the United States wields less influence and holds other priorities than close partnership with Europe. Consequently, European leaders appear willing to sacrifice core national interests to preserve the unity of the political West for a little while longer. In private, they may express disdain for Trump. In public, they pay tribute to Daddy and line up diligently in front of his desk to receive praise or ridicule. Yet this subservience is inherently temporary. Leaders who disregard fundamental national interests are, in time, swept aside by the very forces they seek to suppress. The mantra of peace through strength can be translated into peace through escalation, with the assumption that the opponent will come to the table and submit to US demands. However, rival great powers that have nowhere to retreat will respond to escalation with reciprocation. The delusions of the strongman in the declining hegemony will therefore inevitably trigger major wars.